We all fear the other. It's a classic human fear that has been beaten into us for thousands of years. If there is something that we don't know about or can't relate to, it's scary. And if it's not scary, it's at least unsettling or off-putting. It helps us survive. For these reasons, monsters and villains have always been a fantastic canvas on which to project spooky stuff. But what about when we watch a movie from the perspective of the bad guy? What happens then? Do we relate, or are we more disturbed than ever? Let's find out by counting down the top 5 horror movies from the monster's perspective. Coming in at number 5, we've got Maniac. You guys are getting a 2-for-1 here because both versions of Maniac are definitely worth a watch. There's the 1980s version starring Joe Spinell as the greasiest serial killer imaginable, tearing through all sorts of hapless victims and stapling their scalps to mannequins. Then there's the equally disturbing 2012 version shot largely in point of view with the one and only Elijah Wood as the maniac in question. Both movies are fascinating looks into the minds of depraved killers and the horrid nonsense that goes through their heads as they justify their own violent urges to themselves. Maniac is all about the unraveling mind and the poor folks who find themselves caught in the crossfire. But each movie approaches this a little differently. We'll start with the original. Frank, a truly 80s looking man, finds himself in a lot of places full of women he hates. Like a seriously powerful hatred of women in this guy. The first thing we see Frank do is follow a woman of the night up to a hotel room, have a mental breakdown, and then strangle her to death. Then we get to see the first maniacal scalping go down. Oh, Frank, why you like this? Well, as it turns out, his mother was a lady of the night as well, and plenty abusive towards her son. So that probably had something to do with his homicidal urges later on. This plays out over the course of the movie, with Frank putting himself in many situations where he'll be alone with women who he probably shouldn't be alone with. You can see him as he tries on different identities to get close enough to kill, and soon his own identity is out the window. His mind breaks after a plethora of kills, and he's murdered by his own mannequins, inhabited by the personalities of the women he's scalped. Goodness me. If you really want a Maniac's perspective though, you gotta watch the 2012 version. It's largely shot in the Maniac's point of view as Elijah Wood takes on the role of Frank. Again, Frank was abused as a child, leading to his current obsession of removing the tops of women's heads so he can brush their hair later on. Yikes. This version gives the audience a true killer perspective and is extremely disturbing and gnarly because of it. It proved to be quite a challenge to make because of this, and the results are mind-boggling. Coming in at number 4, we've got Under the Skin. Now for something completely different, we've got Under the Skin. No point of view here, but it is shot in a style that's quite uncommon for horror. It's very naturalistically shot, with most of the footage being captured by hidden cameras. It features a cast of largely amateur actors, many of whom have never acted in anything before. And the main character slash monster is an alien in the form of Scarlett Johansson. Yeah, I almost left that bit out. The narrative structure is pretty loose, but the best way to describe Under the Skin is to say it's about an alien who takes on human form to seduce and dissolve people in Scotland. The alien never explains what it's doing or what its purpose is, but the whole movie revolves around its different methods of blending in and kidnapping people. It might not sound like it's directly from the alien's perspective, but the way this flick is made makes things that should feel familiar to humans on Earth somehow feel new and foreign. It's slow-moving and very strange, but absolutely fascinating. It was originally meant to be a much more special effects heavy movie, but it ended up being sparse and lonely like it is today. Essentially, it's hopping into this alien's life without really knowing anything about it and sort of figuring it out from there. But this alien isn't just gonna try and blend in. It wants to put people in this weird gelatinous void and dissolve them into nothing. And if you look back to the title, Under the Skin, you probably have a good idea of what they mean by that. Sure, it looks like ScarJo on the outside, but beneath that human-like exterior, there's a creature nobody can fathom, and you're gonna see the world through its eyes. You're not going to agree with everything it does, nor will you enjoy every moment, but watching the days go by in the areas around Glasgow and attempting to figure out just what this extraterrestrial being is up to is nothing short of hypnotic. Makes you want to be extra careful when you get propositioned by somebody who doesn't talk much. In fact, now that I mention it, the whole thing sort of reminds me of that POV short from VHS. Except now we're in the position of almost sympathizing with the man-eater. Coming in at number 3, we've got Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Ahead of its time in many ways, this movie portrays a murderous man on a quest to continue killing. Maybe he'll feel some emotions from time to time, who knows? Based on a real-life serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, this movie essentially chronicles the many murders a madman might make happen. The thing is, in the grand scheme of things, Henry isn't really the bad guy in this movie. He meets up with local drug dealer and ex-prison mate Otis, and through contrasting their methods and reasons for killing, you see two very different stories. See, Henry hates any sort of sexual violence, especially against women, as he was abused and humiliated by his mother as a child. So while he goes around robbing people of their lives, he doesn't cross that line. It might not seem like much, especially coming from a serial killer, but it's an interesting code of ethics for a murderer to have. Otis, on the other hand, has no such reservations about defiling the human body. He'll do whatever. This causes contention in their little serial killer club that travels America, ending lives as they go. Henry, while usually emotionless and cold on the surface, lets through little bits of feeling, and they shine through from time to time. It's an odd effect, especially when we know who we're dealing with. The character study of a truly depraved individual provides some disturbing insights, and when compared to the utter depravity of his companion, it stirs complicated feelings. Coming in at number 2, we've got Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. If true crime documentaries and podcasts keep picking up steam the way they have been lately, we might actually end up with a real-life Leslie Vernon. Behind the Mask is a mockumentary detailing the life and times of aspiring slasher, you guessed it, Leslie Vernon. In this world, slashers from various horror movies actually existed, and their rampages went down in history as major events. So of course, lots of folks decided they wanted to be the next big killer. Kinda like idolizing a famous athlete, but with less concussions somehow. So we follow Leslie as a documentary crew records his exploits, with all the gritty behind-the-scenes details making it to the public. Our titular serial killer has been preparing a massacre for ages, building up his backstory, rigging an old farmhouse to be the perfect killing ground, and studying human behavior in horror movie situations. He's even got the perfect final girl to face off against. The documentary crew loves the energy Leslie has for serial killery, but also feels kind of bad about being complicit in a mass killing. So after a movie jam-packed with deconstructed horror tropes, the crew decides to work against Leslie and save the teens. This causes the movie to shift into a proper slasher style, with the hapless individuals fighting against the powerful killer. Leslie refuses to back down, and even with behind-the-scenes knowledge, the documentarians have a tough time winning. So after spending a majority of the runtime profiling this killer, we get to watch the plan unfold in unexpected ways. Will Leslie Vernon go down in the horror history books? Better watch to find out. And finally at number 1, we've got The House That Jack Built. Part Dante allegory, part quasi-documentary, all disturbing look into the mind of a maniac. The House That Jack Built is a thoroughly upsetting and engrossing flick, all from the perspective of Jack and his companion Virgil. Jack is an unreliable narrator, walking Virgil through his many murders as he attempts to justify them as artistic expression or as offshoots of neuroses. A failed architect, Jack was looking for something to give his life meaning. He started killing sort of randomly, with total strangers being dashed against the rocks for seemingly no reason. But as he decided to pursue more human relationships, he found some of his victims' deeper fears. A sadist at heart, Jack pulls off some of the most viscerally upsetting kills out there. All the while, in a calm, measured voice, Jack claims that he has good reasons for causing all this pain. In taking these lives, he says he's done something special, something worthwhile. Once you figure out the illusion going on here, it's clear that Jack is heading headlong towards hell. But to know that he knows this and is still trying to reason with Virgil shows how lost and misguided he truly is. Jack is an evil, self-obsessed individual, and the house that Jack built puts us right there with them, explanations and all, as he pulls off his brutal murders. Hopefully nobody relates too much to any of these monsters. The last thing we need right now is another psychopath going around plotting elaborate murders. So what'd you think of the list? Have you seen all these movies? What's a movie from the monster's perspective that you think should have been mentioned? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more pernicious ones from the top 5 horror movie monsters that can't be stopped, part 4. Macy Ballard says, Art reminds me of Ronald McDonald. He's Art McDonald, Ronald's long-lost crazy brother. They locked him away when Ronald was a kid, and that's why he doesn't know anything about him, lol. Just putting it out there. Good lord. Could you imagine the PR nightmare McDonald's would have to deal with if that turned out to be true? DMB Lon says, thanks to the Final Destination movies, we have the ultimate unstoppable monster, death. The best all other monsters can hope for is a brief reprieve, and if they are truly immortal, then they will eventually wish that they weren't. Death does come for us all. And Newman Outdoors says, this has become one of my favorite channels, and you have become one of our favorite Newmans. That's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna sit in front of a whole stack of amps and just wait for that feedback. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. There's the 1980s version starring Joe Spinell as the greasiest serial killer imagined. The first thing we do, part Dante allegory, part quasi-documentary, boy, I forgot how to speak for a second there. Part Dante allegory, part quasi-documentary. What is happening? Why can't I say this line? And Newman Outdoors says this has become one of my favorite channels, and you have become one of our